Chapter 1401. After getting the confirmation from the system, Meg lay down on the ground. No matter how much the system talked, he was too lazy to look at the pile of durians next to him. Anyway, it was useless to learn this skill, so he could do whatever he wanted. After a while, the durian space disappeared, and Meg appeared in the kitchen. "Heh, you're still too inexperienced to fight with Dad." Meg smirked and walked to the kneading table. All the ingredients were ready, and there was a big golden durian at the side. As soon as he got close, he could smell the strong durian fragrance. Although Meg had just come out of the durian space, he was still amazed by the fragrance. Meg had eaten the Bobcat King durian before. It was indeed better than the ordinary golden pillow durian in terms of texture and taste, but the fragrance was still a lot worse than this durian. After washing his hands and changing into his chef's uniform, Meg moved his fingers and grabbed the durian. With a little force, the durian with a small crack was opened by him. The strong durian fragrance suddenly hit his face. The ginger durian meat was very plump and ripe just right, making people want to take a bite. "It's really perfect." Meg nodded and resisted the urge to eat the ingredients. Of course, such an unprofessional behavior would not appear on an excellent chef like him. He took out the durian meat and slid the knife through the durian meat to take out the silver coin-sized core. The pulp took up almost all of it. The most complicated part of making pizza was kneading the dough. How to make the dough meet the requirements was a test of the chef's technique and skills. Therefore, Meg chose the kneading machine. Pour in the flour, water, and dry yeast according to the ratio, and then press the button to start. As for the system's instructions to knead with his hands, Meg turned a deaf ear to it. Times were advancing. As a good helper for humans, machines had the advantage of high efficiency and stability. Although this was a backup plan, it was obviously more to Meg's liking. Meg had tested it before. Using the kneading machine produced by the system to knead dough, the effect was 99% similar to that of a high-level kneading machine. Although he still insisted on kneading the youtiao with his hands, he decided to use a machine to knead the dough for the pizza. He wanted to treat this Western dessert in a more Western way. To bake a delicious durian pizza, the control of the fire was also quite particular. However, the oven was used, so as long as the time and temperature were adjusted, a qualified pizza could be accurately made. Meg began to practice making pizza according to the steps in his mind. He had a premonition that this would be a sleepless night with durians. Rodu, the palace. On top of the tower, Andre, who was dressed in luxurious clothes, looked toward the southwest with a slight frown. "Your Majesty, the Demon Islands are in a mess, and there are internal conflicts everywhere. I'm afraid that they can no longer unite against the outside world, and their alliance with us will probably be difficult to continue. The Wind Forest had revolted everywhere. Just dealing with the internal chaos was enough to make them badly battered. Do we need to find another reliable ally?" An old official stood behind him and asked respectfully. "Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. The Roth Empire has never had a truly reliable ally. We are just a bunch of bad friends who make use of each other." Andre laughed mockingly. "However, I am a little curious about who is stirring up the situation. Is it Alex and Irina? Or is it those restless fellows in Chaos City? According to our investigation, Alex and Irina did appear on the Fear Islands that day, and Alex used a strange lightning magic to kill Bar Hill. However, they should have gone to rescue the elves, and those elves were brought back to Chaos City. There is no evidence that they are related to the battle between the Abyss Demons and the Flaming Demons," that official answered. "Since they are on the Demon Islands, given Irina's character, how could she not get involved? No evidence is the most suspicious evidence." Andre sneered. That official was stunned. After some deliberation, he said, "Then, should we inform the Flaming Demons and the Abyss Demons? If the two races stop fighting, the main war alliance might be reformed. Since there is no evidence, how are you going to tell them?" Andre turned around and looked at the minister mockingly. "Furthermore, the two clans have already fought to such an extent that it's meaningless to know who started it. They only need to know that their clan leader died in the hands of the other party, and that's enough for them to fight for a few years." That official lowered his head in fear. The Roth Empire doesn't need allies. As long as the giant dragons don't leave Dragon Island, this world will be mine sooner or later, Andre said coldly. At the Elven Embassy in Chaos City. This is the letter that the chief wants me to pass to you. Our family is already at the crossroads of destruction. He hopes that you can make the right choice. Ingwe handed a letter to Blower before leaving with a serious expression. Blower looked at the familiar handwriting on the letter. He stood at the door for a while before turning around and closing the door. There was an oil lamp on the desk in the room. There were 2 beds, one big and one small, in the bedroom. Anna was already asleep on the small bed. Blower walked to the desk softly and tapped on the letter. A faint golden light flashed, and the layer of golden light on the envelope disappeared. He opened the envelope and took out the faint yellow letter inside. Blower, I haven't heard from you for a long time. 15 minutes later, Blower put down the letter in his hand. His brows furrowed slightly as he fell into deep thought. The wind outside the window suddenly blew open, and a gust of cold wind blew in. Blower waved his hand, and the window closed again. He crumpled the letter into a ball, and it fell onto the table as countless shreds. A letter from home, a commission. The survival of his family was on his shoulders. A self-deprecating smile appeared on Blower's face. Since when had he become so capable? He was the useless son who had brought shame to his father. Elven territory, Brewster family territory. In a castle, Elliot looked at Sally, who was wearing a set of extravagant clothes, and said in a low voice, Sally, you should listen to High Priestess Helena and cancel your engagement with Blower. The Elven Queen doesn't need a husband. This will only dilute your authority. Sally turned to look at Elliot, and said, Is that so? I remember that father was the one who made this engagement for me. You said that Blower was a very good choice, and that I would be able to find happiness if I were to marry him. Elliot choked upon hearing this, and an awkward expression appeared on his face as he said, That was because our family was in a difficult situation, and we had no choice but to make you marry Blower. He's just a weak and useless guy. How could he be worthy of you? We'll go to the Billy family tomorrow to cancel this engagement. Before you officially become the princess, you have to draw a clear line between you and them. If they dare to resist, the High Priestess will help us destroy their family. They're already on the list to be removed. Sally looked at Elliot with a calm expression, and said, No, I won't cancel this engagement. I think Blower is a brave elf, and I'm willing to marry him. A hint of fury appeared on Elliot's face, and his voice also became heavier as he said, Sally, for the sake of our family, you have to cancel your engagement with Blower. He's an elf from a completely different world from you. I don't need you to make decisions for me. Sally's voice also became cold. You. Elliot raised his hand. Sally looked at him coldly, and said in a cold voice, I'll be the Elven princess in 3 days. Father, remember your position. I won't cancel this engagement. Elliot's hand trembled slightly, and he lowered it in the end. Sally walked past him and disappeared through the door. Chapter 1402. Who am I? Where am I? This floor. Why is it so familiar? Camilla opened her eyes. Her head was a little dizzy, and she looked around in confusion. Her gaze landed on the floor, and she suddenly felt that it was familiar. Then, some memories from last night came flooding back. She, who couldn't sleep, seemed to have come to the restaurant to drink with Meg. Then, Irina was also there, so she ended up drinking with Irina. Drinking. Camilla patted her head, which was still a little dizzy. The feeling of dizziness after a hangover was indeed uncomfortable. In the past, she would only have a small glass of red wine before sleeping, but last night, she seemed to have drunk countless glasses of beer. Wait. Did I do something strange when I was drinking? Camilla's eyes gradually widened. She seemed to have eaten grass. Tender green lettuce leaves wrapped around freshly roasted beef cubes. Oh my God. As a vampire aristocrat, she actually ate grass. And she even took the initiative to eat it. Camilla wanted to find a hole to hide in. This was too humiliating. If this spread out, she felt that she would probably lose something like her face. However, this floor still looked very familiar. Camilla's gaze was fixed on the floor again. She suddenly remembered that she had completely lost her memory after getting drunk last night. It was probably what humans called fragmentation. Then, she vaguely remembered that she was carried up. Could it be Boss? Camilla's expression became nervous. She lifted the blanket to take a look. Her clothes were still intact. Other than some creases from sleeping, there were no signs of them being untied or torn. He really can't do it. Camilla was relieved, but she was inexplicably a little disappointed. She already remembered why the floor here was so familiar. It was because she had slept on this floor last night in the same position, at the same angle, sleeping on the same floor. Bastard, you actually made this countess sleep on the floor again. Camilla sat up angrily. Just as she was about to vent her anger on Meg, who was lying on the bed, she met two pairs of blue eyes. Big Sister Camilla, you're awake, Amy, who was lying on the bed, said to Camilla with a smile. You're sleeping pretty soundly even on the floor. Irina leaned lazily against the headboard with a smile on her face. Camilla was stunned for a while before she subconsciously asked, why can you lie on his bed? Because good-looking people can lie on the bed, Irina said with a smile. Then why am I lying on the floor? Camilla asked in confusion. Then, she suddenly realized something and her expression changed slightly. She gritted her teeth and said, that guy actually thinks that I should be lying on the floor. But Big Sister Camilla, why are you sleeping on the floor of our room again? Amy asked in confusion. Irina and Camilla looked at Amy at the same time. Camilla was a little flustered. That night, she couldn't bear to recall it. Irina's gaze had a hint of danger. It also meant that this wasn't the first time. It seemed like this wasn't the first time such a late-night invitation had happened. Moreover, it had even progressed to the room. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door, followed by Meg's voice. Are you up? It's breakfast time. I'm suddenly so hungry. Let's go eat breakfast. Camilla got up from the floor nimbly, tugged at her skirt, and quickly walked to the door. What is she feeling guilty about? Irina narrowed her eyes slightly and was a little curious. Camilla opened the door and saw Meg standing at the door. She glared at him, walked past him, and even raised her leg to step on his foot. Meg retracted his foot in time and looked at Camilla's back in confusion. Was this woman so scary when she woke up? He was only here to call them for breakfast. When Meg turned around, a pillow flew at his head and hit his face. He reached out and took the pillow away. Irina stood in front of him and looked at him with a faint smile. How many times has this happened? Leniency to those who confess, severity to those who resist. Amy stuck her head out from behind and said in an old-fashioned manner, shit. Meg panicked. He didn't expect his backyard to catch fire so quickly. He thought he had arranged it well, but he didn't expect his cleverness to backfire on him. It was most likely that the incident of Camilla staying over last time was exposed. It's the second time. The last time she was drunk, I also arranged for her to sleep on the floor. Meg confessed. Anyway, he really didn't do anything, so he had a clear conscience. Irina stared into Meg's eyes for a while, then put away the folding chair in her hand. She stretched and asked, what do you want to eat for breakfast? Meg looked at Irina's graceful curves under her tight pajamas and heaved a sigh of relief. As expected, he was lenient to those who confessed. He smiled and said, as long as it's something I know how to cook, I'll make it for you. Irina's lips curled into a smile. She thought for a while and said, a sweet tofu pudding, a yangju fried rice, a bowl of soy milk with a youtiao. I want the same. Amy raised her little hand. Okay, you two go wash up first. Meg nodded with a smile, then turned and went downstairs. Meg walked to the kitchen door and saw Camilla standing at the door with a glass of water in her hand, thinking about life with her hair down. Are you okay? Meg looked at her and asked. Last night, when he heard her talk about how she was forced to marry twice in a row, he felt a little more pity for this countess who looked strong on the outside. When Camilla heard the sound, she suddenly raised her head and looked at Meg. She said a little nervously, what should we do? Irina knows that we slept together. Meg. No, how did we sleep together? Miss, you have to be responsible for what you say. You can't just insult my innocence. Meg's eyelids twitched. Was she so scary early in the morning? Camilla also realized that there was something wrong with her expression. She quickly waved her hand and said, "No. I mean, she knows that we slept in the same room. I'm a pure vampire. I'm still a pure man." Meg rolled his eyes. He was also a little convinced by this girl's thinking. He reached out and pressed down on her trembling shoulders. He looked into her eyes and said, "Remember, nothing happened between us. You just slept on the floor. So, if you don't say anything, and she doesn't say anything, no one will know." Camilla looked at Meg and gradually calmed down. Then, she said a little angrily, "Scumbag." Huh. Meg looked at Camilla strangely. She slept on the floor. How was he a scumbag? Wonderful book house. Chapter 1403. Why is Irina on your bed? Camilla asked him back with an indignant look in her eyes. Although Irina was indeed as beautiful as a fairy, she was also as pretty as a flower. Why was she sleeping on the floor, but Irina could sleep on the bed? Furthermore, you slept with Alex's woman. Aren't you afraid that he'll chop you up? Camilla's voice lowered a little. She felt that she had suddenly grasped something important, and even her expression became a little nervous. What do you mean I slept with Alex's woman? I haven't slept with her yet. Meg rolled his eyes. Furthermore, how was Alex going to chop him up? Was he going to make him castrate himself? Looking at Camilla's mysterious expression, Meg could roughly guess what she was thinking. He helplessly said, "Princess Irina has been staying in the restaurant for many days. Because she doesn't have a suitable place to stay in Chaos City now, she's staying in the restaurant temporarily. Considering her status, she's sleeping in the master bedroom, and I'm sleeping in the small bedroom next door." Camilla was a little confused. Why didn't she know about this? "Boss, you guys are up." Just then, Gina came downstairs with a yawn. She looked at Camilla, who was standing at the kitchen door, and was a little surprised. "Big sister Camilla, you're here so early too?" "Gina, is Princess Irina staying in the restaurant?" Meg asked Gina. "Yeah. Aren't Princess Irina and Amy staying in your room?" Gina nodded before saying, "Boss, if you feel lonely staying alone, you can move into my room." Camilla, who was a little embarrassed, glared at Meg again, and said, "Scumbag." Mag. What could he do? The mermaid princess from Lantiste was just so hospitable. Irina brought Amy downstairs. Mia and the others also arrived one after another. They served piping hot kanji with pork and century egg to the cleaners. After everyone had breakfast, Meg prepared to send Amy to school. "Boss, I want to take a long leave." Shirley caught up with Meg and said to him at the door. Meg looked at Shirley in surprise. The Night Elves and Irina were both in Chaos City, so why did he have to apply for leave? There are some family matters that need to be settled at home. Shirley glanced at Anna, who was standing not far away, with an apologetic look on her face. She then looked at Meg, and said, "I can only leave Anna to you." Meg saw that Shirley didn't want to say more, so he didn't ask further. He pondered for a while and nodded. "Okay, I'll take good care of Anna. Take care of yourself." "All right." Shirley nodded. She turned and walked towards Anna. She squatted down and hugged her gently, whispering something into her ear. Then, she stood up and said a few words to Irina in private. Finally, she bade farewell to everyone and left directly. "I'll wait for you to come back." "Please, you have to come back," Anna said with reddened eyes as she chased Shirley to the door, and saw that Shirley had already mounted her horse. "Don't worry. I'll come back. I definitely will." Shirley turned and looked at Anna with a beautiful smile before galloping away on her horse. "Miss Shirley, are you leaving again?" Constantine rushed out from the group and called out to Shirley's back. However, she had already gone far away, and only her back view was left. What a sad story. Meg looked at Constantine with pity as he rode the carriage to send Amy to school. The Wind Forest was going through a transformation. He had already found out about Shirley's, or rather, Blower's, identity from the Grey Temple's information. As the young master of the Billy family, he was also engaged to Sally. No matter how amazing he was, He naturally had his reasons for choosing to return to the Wind Forest at such a turbulent time. Blower chose to go back, and he respected his choice. However, since he had become a member of the Night Elves, they would definitely meet again in the near future. Or rather, they would fight on the same side. On the way to send Amy to school, the little fellow hugged his waist, and curiously asked, "Father, do you like Mother or Big Sister Camilla? Or Big Sister Gloria? If you have to choose between them, who would you choose?" Only children make choices. Meg smiled scornfully. "As for me, other than your mother, do I dare to choose anyone else? If I choose anyone else, I might be beaten to death," Amy said after thinking for a while. "It's good that you know. Don't use the word again so casually next time," Meg said seriously with a sigh. "Oh," Amy replied, and then said, "But Big Sister Camilla really slept on the floor again." All right. Let's not talk about this anymore." Meg nodded helplessly. He sent Amy to school and returned to the restaurant. Not long after the morning service ended, the doorbell rang. Meg, who was about to have a cup of tea and rest, got up and walked to the door. When he opened the door, he was shocked by the hundreds of lava demons standing outside. Meg's gaze landed on Sargeras, who was standing at the front, and he asked, "Director Sargeras, is the Burning Legion recruiting again?" Sargeras looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Mack, they are all my people, and also members of the Burning Legion. From today onwards, please take care of them, boss." Meg also noticed that there were men, women, old, and young among these lava demons. It seemed that Sargeras had indeed brought all the lava demons to Chaos City. However, the lava demons, who used to be so powerful, were only left with such a group of old and weak soldiers. It was indeed a little sad. Moreover, Meg felt that there was something different about Sargeras. Apart from the fact that he had broken through to the 9th tier, there seemed to be some changes in his aura. He probably looked more domineering. "You're too kind." Meg nodded with a smile. He seemed to have already seen a group of Largi Ruggiamo enthusiasts. Sargeras had told him bluntly about the benefits of Ruggiamo to the lava demons before. Sargeras was straightforward and reliable. Meg admired him very much. If Largi Ruggiamo could help their declining race rise again as the Burning Legion, he would be very willing to help them within his ability. However, if you want to buy Ruggiamos in a group, you don't have to come in so many people. That way, it will be more convenient for you to buy, and it won't affect the other customers in the queue, Meg reminded them again. Otherwise, the restaurant would be exclusively for the Burning Legion in the future. All right, at most 10 people in the queue in the future. Sargeras nodded with a silly smile. After getting Mr. Mack's approval, the rise of the Burning Legion was no longer a fantasy. After sending the Burning Legion away, Meg heard the sound of iron being forged next door, and suddenly remembered those machines that he had ordered from Morbai. Now that the Night Elves had nothing to do, he might as well let them work in time. They could also be self-reliant and earn some military expenses for the Burning Legion. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1404. Mr. Mack, you're here. Morbai walked out of the smithing room when he heard the commotion. He wiped the sweat off his face with a towel, and smiled at Meg. "The machine is almost done. When do you need it? I'll get someone to send it over for you. If it's already done, then the sooner, the better. Once the machine is installed, the factory can start operations," Meg said with a smile. He was very satisfied with Morbai's progress. "What kind of machine are these parts going to be assembled into?" "It doesn't look simple," Morbai asked curiously. "A spinning machine. However, it's driven by a steam engine, so it's much more efficient than manual spinning." Meg smiled. The steam engine had already been sent over from the hill. After the spinning machine was installed, the factory could start operations. Spinning machine? Morbai scratched his head. He didn't quite understand what Meg meant. The two of them discussed the delivery of the parts for a while. After confirming that all the parts would be delivered over the next 2 days, Meg returned to the restaurant. Irina went to the factory to train the Night Elves, and Gina followed MIA and the rest to the ice cream shop. Hence, only Meg was left in the restaurant. He made a cup of green tea, brought it upstairs, and placed it in front of the study table. Meg opened the box that Roland gave him, and continued to look through the information. The threat of the Demon Islands was temporarily removed, which basically met Meg's expectations. At least, they wouldn't be able to band together to create trouble before the next peace talk. However, the demons weren't the only race that liked to fight. The most powerful race, the Roth Empire, was still getting restless. The orcs were quickly integrating and planning to create trouble during the peace talk. The forest trolls were no longer satisfied with staying in the dark shadow forest to rot, and were planning to expand their territory. Meg knew the Roth Empire the best. Although the situation of Johnson and Sean fighting for the throne was getting more and more tense, as long as Andre was alive, the Roth Empire would be an iron bucket that could not be torn apart. Killing Andre was a good way to split the Roth Empire apart, but Andre was probably the most difficult person to kill in this world. The Magus Tower was not far from the royal palace, and no one knew how many 10th-tier powerhouses were hiding around him. In the past 100 years, the Roth Empire had developed at an unimaginable speed. Both the number of 10th-tier knights and 10th-tier magic casters had reached a terrifying number. Although humans didn't have powerful physical talents, their outstanding learning ability, continuous optimization of cultivation methods, and large-scale cultivation system allowed the number of powerhouses in the Roth Empire to increase rapidly in the short span of 100 years. In order to break through to level 10, apart from proper cultivation, talent was of utmost importance. There was ultimately a limit to the number. However, the Roth Empire's large number of mid-range and high-end combat power that had been neglected by the various races was an existence that was enough to make the various races fearful. Alex used to be a high-ranking officer in the Roth Empire's military, so Meg knew clearly from his memories how many 6th-tier to 9th-tier knights and magic casters the Roth Empire had. This large number of mid-range and high-end combat power was enough to lead the Roth Empire's cavalry to flatten any race. As for why the orcs were able to fight the Roth Empire on par with them at the border, what they didn't know was that the various military districts of the Roth Empire had been secretly rotating every year for the past few decades. The border war with the orcs that had never stopped was just a practical training ground for the Roth Empire. After Andre took over, he had been very patient and restrained in his foreign policy, and focused on his development. When the Crassus fireball blasted the giant dragon down from the sky, and Alex's longsword chopped off the dragon's head, even the giant dragon probably didn't know that the once weak humans now had the ability to challenge them, the overlords of the sky. As a human, Meg felt gratified and honored. The survival history of humans was a sad one. Just like all the weak races, some perished in the long river of history, and some became weaker and became vassals. Humans had paid a huge price to survive the racial war and have a place to live. Only when they were strong enough could they be truly respected and survive in this cruel world. Until now, Andre had shown all the qualities and abilities that a qualified king needed. Even if some of his methods might be stained with blood and conspiracies, the Roth Empire already had the ability to resist all wars. However, what made Meg uneasy was that after having such powerful abilities, this aging king no longer seemed to be satisfied with just defending one area. Instead, he was preparing to embark on the path of conquering the entire world. From being a victim back then to being a perpetrator, what was the difference between this and those races that had harmed humans back then? 100 years had passed. To ordinary humans, it was a cruel thing to start a war where ordinary humans were destined to lose for the king's ambition and old grudges. Even if humans ruled this world in the end, no one knew how many years it would take for the scars caused by this war to heal, and how many innocent races would be wiped out in the war. Meg hated war. He hated the world that was about to sink into the flames of war. He wanted to spread the model of Chaos City to the entire world. If all the races could open up their borders and coexist peacefully, the sword of Damocles hanging over this world would really disappear. As long as Andre is alive, the Roth Empire is indeed invincible. Meg closed the information in his hands and sighed softly. However, once Andre died suddenly, whether it was Sean or Josh who took over, it might speed up the development of the current situation. These two were not peace-loving people, and Sean had long been itching to wipe out the orcs. After setting the information about the Roth Empire aside, Meg picked up the information about the orcs to read. The orcs were the ones who had the deepest conflict and needed to be resolved the most urgently. The orcs were also very powerful. Although they were made up of many scattered tribes, they could quickly gather and work together in times of war with their totems and beliefs. Meg's next target was the orcs. Once the Fork tribe was controlled by the August tribe, the orcs would become a race that was completely controlled by the main battle tribe, and would pose a serious threat to the dwarfs immediately. The internal integration of the Fork tribe had already reached the final stage. Most of the people who were loyal to the previous chief were locked up in the dungeon or killed. They would publicly execute the chief's son 10 days later, and officially crown Gary as the new chief of the tribe. 10 days, Meg murmured. That killer who was trying hard to find his direction shouldn't know about this. Chapter 1405. Connie, what's wrong with you? Didn't I ask you to go back to the restaurant to get an apron? Why are you sweating so much? Mia asked in surprise as she handed the ice cream in her hand to a child and looked at Connie, who walked in with sweat all over his face. Elizabeth and the others also looked at Connie strangely. Connie said anxiously, "Did you guys know that the restaurant disappeared? I walked all the way to the end of the square, but I couldn't find the restaurant. I looked back and forth many times, but I still couldn't find it. I only saw a shop that sold pots. Did our restaurant disappear? It's gone." Everyone was slightly surprised when they heard this. How could the restaurant disappear? Also, the blacksmith shop next to the restaurant didn't sell pots. Connie, didn't you turn left after leaving the restaurant? Barbara asked after thinking for a moment. Didn't I turn left after leaving the restaurant? Connie nodded matter-of-factly. Everyone looked at Connie with complicated expressions. I'm sorry, Connie. I shouldn't have given you this task. It might be a little difficult for you, Yabemia said apologetically. It's hard to imagine how difficult it must be for you to go out and deliver food. Barbara looked sad. So, delivering food once a day is indeed the limit. Raina chuckled, and everyone smiled. Did I get the direction wrong again? Connie tapped his fingers and blushed a little. Why don't we have durian pizza for lunch today? Meg came out of the study and went downstairs as he muttered to himself. He hadn't tried the durian pizza that he learned about last night, so he didn't know if Amy and the others would be able to accept the taste. As for the official launch, Meg planned to delay it for a day or two. He had to think about how to launch such a heavy food. Should he set up an exclusive area like the stinky tofu, or should he completely open it to the public? Meg had just come downstairs when Phyllis and Camilla arrived. They were in charge of preparing the ingredients, so they always came early. Boss. Phyllis greeted Meg with a smile. Camilla, on the other hand, glared at Mag before walking past him into the kitchen. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't know what he had done to provoke this lady. She was the one who came to his door to drink. The one who got her drunk was Irina. The one who tricked her into eating grass was also Irina. He even kindly carried her upstairs and made a bed for her to sleep on. She couldn't find such a good man anywhere else, right? Boss, did you offend big sister Camilla? Phyllis asked softly as she looked at Camilla, who was chopping the vegetables, while putting on her apron. Maybe she's a little heaty. Eating more vegetables will help reduce the heat, Meg said with a smile. His voice was just loud enough for Camilla to hear. This fellow, he must have seen me eating grass yesterday. Camilla blushed. A cucumber was instantly chopped into pieces. Mag glanced at the cucumber who had met a tragic end, and immediately shut his mouth. He walked past Camilla carefully with his back facing her. The durian in the corner of the fridge had already been delivered. It was round and plump, golden in color. It was indeed a very high-quality durian. Meg opened the fridge door, and a strong durian fragrance was released. What's that strange smell? Phyllis, who was about to start chopping vegetables, looked around in confusion. The strange smell that suddenly appeared rushed into her nose. It was a little pungent at first. It stinks. Camilla covered her nose and her face turned green. She retreated to the kitchen door and looked at Meg, who was standing beside the fridge with a round thing full of spikes in his hand. She asked in horror, "What are you holding in your hand?" "Durian, a very expensive and delicious fruit," Meg said frankly. As an evolved durian fan, he couldn't help but drool when he smelled this fragrance. Camilla kept retreating from the kitchen. After the smell was blocked, she let go of her nose and gasped for air. She still looked at the strange-looking durian in Meg's hand with a lingering fear. As a noble vampire with a strong obsession with cleanliness, she absolutely couldn't tolerate stinky smells. For example, stinky tofu. Every time she smelled that smell, she would feel like vomiting. Therefore, whenever Meg was about to start making stinky tofu, she would leave the kitchen in advance. However, the smell of this durian today was not inferior to the stinky tofu. Just one sniff was enough to make her feel like she was suffocating. Although Phyllis's reaction wasn't as exaggerated as Camilla's, from the way she tried to control her expression and gradually frowned, she also couldn't immediately accept the smell of the durian. After a period of time, she had already accepted the smell of the stinky tofu. Especially after tasting it herself, her resistance to that smell had completely disappeared. However, this fruit with the same pungent smell, was it really as delicious as Meg said? This made her somewhat doubtful. Meg had already expected the reaction of the two. He could imagine the reaction of the customers after smelling this smell. Indeed, treating this new product with caution was the right choice. There would be an extreme contrast between liking and disliking. This is an important ingredient used to make a new product called durian. "Let's have this for lunch today." Meg smiled. "Eat this." Camilla's eyes widened. She felt that the situation was a little bad. She couldn't stand the smell alone. If they still wanted her to eat it, they might as well kill her. Meg glanced at Camilla and placed the durian on the side of the stove. With a twist of his hand, the shell of the durian was broken open, revealing 2 full pieces of durian meat. The fragrance of the durian became more intense. The plump durian meat was ripe just right. "How do we eat this?" Phyllis was already used to this smell, so she made her way over to Mag with a curious expression. She was quite interested in this new product that Mag was talking about, as he always came up with some interesting ideas, but he was always able to come up with some amazingly delicious dishes. Meg took a spoon and directly scooped a big spoonful of durian meat and passed it to Phyllis. He smiled and said, "You can eat it directly." "Eat it directly?" Phyllis took the spoon with some doubt. She hesitated and didn't know how to eat it. "It's sticky, yellow, and soft. This terrible appearance and shape, and there's also a strange smell. Can it really be eaten?" Camilla stood at the door and looked at the spoonful of durian meat in Phyllis's hand. She thought firmly in her heart, "Even if I die, I will definitely not eat this durian or any other durian-related food." Chapter 1406. Yes, you can eat it directly, just like eating ice cream cake. Meg said to Phyllis in a gentle tone with a smile, just like a poisonous snake tempting Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Phyllis still felt that this smell was a little strange, but after smelling it for a while, it didn't seem so pungent anymore. However, she still couldn't describe what kind of smell it was. It was very special, and different from all the smells she had smelled in the past. After hearing Meg's words, Phyllis hesitated for a moment, and looked up at Meg, only to meet his gentle eyes. It was as if everything would melt into water in his eyes, and a blush instantly appeared on her face. She immediately stuffed the spoonful of durian into her mouth. Phyllis actually ate it. Camilla, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, stared at Phyllis in shock. She couldn't even stand the smell, and Phyllis actually put that strange durian into her mouth. Oh! Phyllis was also stunned. She had only planned to lick a little bit to roughly taste it so that she wouldn't embarrass Meg, but she didn't expect that she would actually put the entire spoonful of durian into her mouth in a moment of nervousness. However, the expected strange taste didn't explode in her mouth. Instead, a sweet taste gradually blossomed. She gently pursed her lips, and the durian melted in her mouth. Its delicate texture was not inferior to that of tofu pudding in the slightest. What followed was a mellow sweetness that instantly filled all of her taste buds. That sweetness was different from that of syrup, and it seemed to have constructed a delicious seal between the two. Then, It suddenly slapped onto her body. She was suddenly able to accept the smell of durian. This wasn't a strange smell, this was an extreme fragrance. The fragrance was so rich that it was pungent, but after tasting it in her mouth, the smell inside and outside her body seemed to have reached a certain balance, as if she had added a filter to her body, and she suddenly felt this fragrance. She swallowed the durian, but the fragrance of the durian still lingered on the tip of her tongue, unwilling to dissipate for a long time. Phyllis closed her eyes, and subconsciously licked her lips with her tongue, and a satisfied smile appeared on her face. Bean Sprout, have you eaten Si? Irina walked into the kitchen, covered her nose, and walked out. She looked at Phyllis, who was still savoring the aftertaste, with a despondent expression. Ah! Phyllis opened her eyes, and saw Irina standing at the door with a look of disbelief on her face as well as the spoon in her hand. She hurriedly wiped the yellow durian residue that was still hanging by the side of her mouth, and shook her head as she said, No, princess, you've misunderstood. Irina sighed, and looked at Phyllis with pity. Although the night elves are indeed in a difficult situation now, you don't have to force yourself like this. How am I going to face you like this? Princess, I really didn't eat. Alright, I'll pretend that I didn't see anything today. Remember to brush your teeth. You still have to cut vegetables for the guests later. Irina waved her hand and then glared at Meg. Why didn't you stop her? Meg had an innocent look on his face. What's going on? Irina did not give them a chance to explain. She turned and walked towards the stairs as she said, I'm tired. I'll take a nap. The three of you can eat slowly. Call me when it's time to eat. Then, the three of them were left looking at each other. Ahem. She doesn't understand the situation. Let's just pretend that nothing happened. Meg coughed dryly to ease the awkwardness. Then, he looked at Phyllis, and asked, How is it, Phyllis? What do you think of the durian taste? Camilla also looked at Phyllis curiously. The feeling of eating such a sticky and strange thing should be terrible, right? I've never eaten such a fruit before. It's shockingly delicious. The rich aroma, delicate texture, and sweet taste are all unbelievable. It can be said that this is the most delicious fruit I've ever eaten. Even all the fruits in the wind forest can't compare to it, Phyllis said sincerely. Now that she smelled the fragrance in the air, her throat couldn't help but move, and her body was already starting to want another bite. How? How is that possible? Camilla, who was expecting Phyllis to say that she had a terrible experience, was stunned. She looked at Phyllis in disbelief. Phyllis turned to look at Camilla with a smile, and said, Big sister Camilla, do you want to try it? This durian is really delicious. It's just like stinky tofu. You can only truly understand its deliciousness after tasting it. I refuse. Camilla crossed her arms. Stinky tofu was also something that she could not accept. No matter how many people said that it was delicious, it was still something that she did not want to try. As for this so-called durian, it was also a food of the same level as stinky tofu to her. She could not even think about tasting it. Meg saw that Camilla was indeed not interested in the durian, and did not want to force her. He placed the durian on the workbench, and turned on the regional odor isolation system in the kitchen. At the same time, he purified the air in the kitchen. Then, he looked at Camilla, and said, You can come in now. I've already controlled the odor to the area around the workbench. Camilla reached into the kitchen, grabbed a handful of air, and sniffed it. After making sure that there was no strange smell, she returned to the kitchen and continued to prepare the ingredients with Phyllis. Meg shook his head helplessly. As expected, durian was something that those who loved it would praise for its fragrance, and those who hated it would complain about its stench. However, the durian pizza still had to be made. Otherwise, how would the world know about the deliciousness of durian? He took out pieces of durian meat, removed the cores, and beat them into a paste. Then, he took out various ingredients and began to make the durian pizza. Phyllis looked at Meg from time to time. She was a little curious. The durian meat was already so delicious, so why did it still need to be processed? And what was a pizza? Meg put the prepared durian pizza into the oven. After a while, Amy, and the rest all returned to the dining room. They were all looking forward to it when they heard that Meg was going to make a new dish for lunch. Amy walked into the kitchen and pointed at the durian shell that was still on the workbench and asked curiously, "Father, what's that hedgehog-like thing?" "That's the durian shell," Meg, who was making the tofu pudding, replied without turning his head. Durian? Nostalgia. Who would be nostalgic for such an ugly and strange thing? Amy was a little perplexed. Phyllis gulped and said softly, "Those who have eaten it will be nostalgic." Chapter 1407. Oh! Everyone's eyes lit up when they heard that. Phyllis had given such high praise, so it seemed like Meg's new dish would definitely be very good. It is indeed an unforgettable smell. Camilla cut the last green bean into the size of a grain of rice. She nimbly removed the thin daggers from her fingertips, then looked at Meg and said, "My work is done. I'll make a move first." "Aren't you going to have lunch before you leave?" Meg asked. "No, I don't think I like the smell," Camilla answered very decisively as she started to take off her apron. Everyone looked at Camilla with more confusion. Phyllis had praised the new dish, but from the looks of it, Camilla didn't seem to like it. She didn't even want to stay for lunch with everyone. This situation had never happened before. Such a huge contrast was puzzling. Ding! Just then, the oven made a reminder that it was time. Meg opened the oven door casually. A strong aroma wafted out of the restaurant along with the hot air. "Wow! It smells so good." Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the oven in surprise. "What a strange smell. I can't describe it, but it's just very strange," Barbara said with a frown as she covered her nose. Everyone had different expressions. Although they weren't too exaggerated, they all looked at the oven with surprise. What kind of smell was this? Meanwhile, Camilla instantly disappeared from the kitchen, leaving only an apron that slowly fell to the ground. She was already at the entrance of the restaurant, ready to open the door and leave. "Wait," Meg called out as he walked toward Camilla. Camilla stopped in her tracks and turned back to look at Meg. She frowned slightly and held her breath at the same time. "Have lunch before you leave," Meg said with a smile as he walked up to Camilla. "Ha, I will never touch that kind of strange thing." Camilla looked as if she would rather die than submit. "Last night, when I used the photo stone to commemorate my handsomeness today, I accidentally left a strange image. The taste of roast beef wrapped in lettuce should be good, right?" Meg leaned close to Camilla and whispered in her ear. Camilla's eyes instantly widened as she looked at the smiling Meg. However, in her eyes, his smile was filled with treachery. "Why don't you go back after lunch?" "I've prepared your portion for lunch," Meg asked again with a smile. "Despicable. Shameless. Scumbag." Camilla gritted her teeth and said softly. She stomped her feet in annoyance and walked back reluctantly. She didn't expect that Meg would take advantage of her precarious situation and use a shadow recording stone to record the scene of her eating grass. If this were to spread, then her reputation in this lifetime would be ruined. "Can't you get over being a scumbag for the rest of your life?" Meg raised his eyebrows. She could choose not to eat durian, but she definitely had to try the durian pizza. Everyone smelled the strange smell. No matter what food it was, as long as they saw her eat it once, they would find it delicious. "Help yourself." Meg put on a pair of disposable gloves and reached out to pick up a slice of pizza. The continuous cheese looked very satisfying, and the shape and color had reached a perfect state. This was the real pinnacle of durian pizza. Meg opened his mouth and took a bite of the pizza. The aroma of durian and cream instantly filled his mouth. The slightly crispy bottom collided with the smooth and delicate durian layer between his teeth. At this moment, it was like a match made in heaven, bringing an ultimate delicious feast to his taste buds and brain. Meg felt as if he was suddenly surrounded by durian. It was a swamp with endless attraction that made people want to sink into it. No pop-up window. Chapter 1408. After the durian was roasted, its texture became more delicate and smooth, making it impossible to ignore its existence and deliciousness. The slightly crispy pizza could not be more wonderful when paired with the durian. As a non-durian pizza lover, Meg felt that he had fallen in love with this delicacy. Eating one bite after another, Meg did not want to waste time to make any comments, because even pausing would be disrespectful to this delicacy. Looking at the father and daughter eating happily, Phyllis, who could not forget the durian, could not help but pick up a piece of durian pizza first. She was now very curious about the taste of the delicious durian meat after it was made into the so-called pizza. Phyllis opened her mouth and took a bite, and her eyes suddenly lit up. The delicate texture of the durian did not disappear because of the heating, but instead felt like it was catalyzed by the heat. The texture was sweet and gentle, but also very impactful, making the mouth completely immersed in the durian's fragrance. The flatbread under the durian served as a perfect foil. The crispy texture and the rich milky fragrance brought an extremely rich taste to this bite of durian meat. Although it looks strange, it seems to be good. Irina also reached out and picked up a piece of durian pizza. She took a bite and frowned slightly, then gradually relaxed, and revealed a somewhat stunned and intoxicated expression. Compared to the smell, the texture and taste of this so-called durian pizza were extremely unique and delicious. Well, I didn't expect it to be so delicious. After eating it, smelling this smell again is a different feeling. I can suddenly feel this delicacy. Irina swallowed the pizza in her mouth and nodded. After getting the verification of the 4 people, everyone except Camilla could not wait any longer. They reached out and picked up a piece of pizza, and then took a big bite. Exclamations and soft moans rose and fell one after another. The deliciousness of the durian pizza was more direct than its fragrance. The sweetness after it melted in the mouth was unexpected and irresistible. Is it really so delicious that it emits such a strange smell? Camilla frowned and looked at everyone who was already intoxicated with the durian pizza, and thought with some doubts in her heart. But soon, she sneered in her heart and said to herself, I think you are all playing me. Camilla, everyone is eating. Don't you want to try it? Mag smiled at Camilla, and curled his lips as he said, or do you want me to make a salad for you alone? Add a point to life. No need, I'll just eat this. Camilla suddenly raised her voice and interrupted Meg. At the same time, she quickly grabbed a piece of pizza in front of her and glanced at Meg's neck with murderous eyes. If eyes could kill, Meg's head would have fallen off 18 times. Chapter 1409. What? Durian Promotion Ambassador? Meg raised his eyebrows. He almost could not control his emotions and blurted it out. The promotion of every kind of food is a great step forward, especially for a controversial food like durian. It's very difficult to make the public accept it. However, every food deserves to be tried and liked. This requires the promotion ambassador to work tirelessly. Shut up. These useless titles are not like collecting cards to exchange for a big gift pack. What's the point of using them? Mag cut off the system's words. He wasn't interested in these meaningless titles, but he was quite interested in the prize wheel. He recalled that he still had 2 chances that he hadn't used yet, and he was saving them up for the 3rd chance to exchange for a premium dish. He did not know what the system meant by a high-class dish, but it should not be bad if it was on the same level as the Buddha jumps over the wall. The title of a chef represents the highest honor. How can it be measured by a big gift pack? The system said seriously. It paused for a while and said, I just looked through the manual and found out that after collecting 10 of these titles, you can exchange for a big mystery gift pack from the system. Eh? There's really one? Meg's eyes lit up. Although he did not know what was in the big mystery gift pack, since he had to collect 10 big gift packs to exchange for it, it should not be bad. However, these titles seemed to only appear after the hidden mission was triggered. It was very accidental. He already had a few titles on him, You're a Good Person, Guardian of the Base, and so on. He was still some distance away from collecting 10 titles. 100 titles in 3 days. If he withdrew from the mission tomorrow, he would only have 2 days left. Selling 100 durian pizzas in 2 days, Meg thought for a while and accepted the mission confidently. At most, he would just be a little mysterious and let the customers order. He was not afraid of the customers flipping the table. After all, there was a group of bosses in the restaurant. If they ordered it, they would eat it obediently. As long as they ate it, Meg was not worried that they would be dissatisfied. Looking at Camilla, who was licking her fingers and staring at the second durian pizza, was the best evidence. Once you ate it, you would fall in love with it. After eating it, you would be reluctant to part with it. What was so difficult about selling 100 servings? The 5 durians were finished in no time. Everyone licked their lips, still wanting more. Meg served each of them a portion of tofu pudding according to their tastes, and lunch was finally over. Boss, this durian pizza is delicious. Are you releasing a new item today? Yarbemia asked curiously as he cleaned up the table. Millimeter. Yes, we'll launch it tonight. Meg nodded. He suddenly remembered that he had to go to the Wind Forest with Irina the day after tomorrow. If he delayed the launch of the durian pizza until tomorrow, it meant that he only had one day to complete the task, which would increase the difficulty of the task. After cleaning up the table and taking a short break, the busy lunch business began again. It's so comfortable to live on the island. With the sea breeze, even the air smells good. Great, I can only hide in Chaos City for a while. I can go back and clear my name after this incident blows over. Tony pressed down on his straw hat and jumped down from his flying steed. He carried a box and walked towards Chaos City's city gate with a helpless expression. Damn you, Boss Hades, you better not let me see you again, Tony thought to himself hatefully, but soon, a hint of bitterness appeared on his face. He sighed softly. Speaking of which, I really want to meet him again. Crayfish is so delicious. Other than him, no one else can make it taste so good. Chaos City, I'm here. I hope you won't disappoint me in the next few months. Tony pressed down on his straw hat and quickened his steps. He heard that there was a restaurant in Amy's that was very popular recently. It appeared on the cover of gourmet magazines many times, and that vegetarian book even created a sales miracle because of that. He was not interested in vegetarian dishes or meat. He only liked seafood. However, since he was in Chaos City, there was no reason not to try such a restaurant. He seriously doubted the standard of that person in the same industry. What was there to brag about with a vegetarian dish? Eggplant with garlic sauce. Shouldn't it be seafood with fish? If he had to force himself to call it a vegetarian dish, the barrier to entry was really getting lower and lower. How could such a magazine have such explosive sales? What was wrong with this world? After entering the city, he flagged down a horse-drawn carriage. He happened to be hungry, so he boarded the carriage and directly said to the coachman, "Take me to your best restaurant." "You're talking about Amy's, right? If you go there now, they'll probably be closed." "You might not be able to eat there," the coachman said with a smile. "Closed so early? Is this how they do business?" Tony was stunned. It was only noon now. He had just gotten off his flying steed, and he was so hungry that his chest was sticking to his back. "It will take half an hour to get to Amy's from here. They close at 1 p.m. sharp, so it's indeed too late," the coachman replied. "Seems like you're a regular customer there. You know so much about them." Tony looked at the coachman in surprise. "How is that possible? Their food is not something that people like me can afford. I have to save up some money occasionally. I can only sneak in a large Ruggiamo when I have 300 copper coins. However, that taste is really unforgettable." The coachman was so enraptured that he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He touched his pocket and said with a smile, "I'll be able to eat there again in 2 days." The coachman's behavior piqued Tony's interest in Mammy Restaurant. He took out a gold coin and handed it to the coachman as he said, "Keep the change. Just deliver it to the entrance of Mammy Restaurant. Since you're open for business, how can you keep customers outside?" "I'm a pro, just what? I dragged such a big box all the way here." Tony forced a smile. This kind of feeling was really uncomfortable. "All right, I'll send you there. If they close later, I'll send you to another place." Seeing that Tony was so generous, the coachman didn't say anything else. He put away the gold coin and drove the carriage away. About half an hour later, The horse-drawn carriage stopped outside Mammy Restaurant. The coachman lifted the curtain and said to Tony, who was about to fall asleep, "Look, isn't this door closed? Shall I send you to another restaurant for your meal?" Tony shivered from the cold wind. He looked outside after hearing the coachman's words. A large restaurant appeared in his line of sight. The exquisite shop and decoration showed off its uniqueness. However, the restaurant's door was closed, and there was a wooden plaque hanging on the door, "Closed. I don't believe that they won't receive customers." Tony jumped down from the carriage and walked to the restaurant's door. He reached out and pulled the bell hanging on the door. Chapter 14:10. The crisp sound of the bell accompanied by the rumbling of the stomach rang outside the restaurant for a long time. Tony grabbed the hemp rope, and only managed to resist the urge to knock on the door after a long while. He withdrew his hand awkwardly. Not only was he not going to receive him, but he was also not even bothered to look at him. "It's your first time here, so you don't know the boss's temper. Even if our city lord came, Mr. Mac wouldn't open the door to welcome him when it's not business hours, let alone you." The coachman looked at Tony with a smile and a hint of pride in his eyes. "This is the best restaurant in our chaos city, and it deserves to be the face of the restaurant. Mr. Mac was even the god of cookery who won first place in the Roth Empire's King's Palace banquet. He definitely has a temper. All right, then I can only come and eat at night." Tony walked back to the horse-drawn carriage helplessly, but he was cursing in his heart. What god of cookery? Could he make something as delicious as the spicy crayfish? In his eyes, Hades was the real god of cookery. Just those 3 crayfish dishes were enough to make him a god. The locomotive is moving normally, and the bumps are within the acceptable range. The lane-changing sensitivity still needs to be fine-tuned, and the braking system has met the braking requirements. Meg stood at the front of the locomotive and spoke confidently as he looked at the hill. Chief Engineer Burrell and a group of steam locomotive engineers listened attentively. They nodded from time to time and frowned from time to time, but most of their faces were glowing with excitement. Meg paused for a while and smilingly said, "The test this time is very successful. We only need to optimize a few of the small problems that I mentioned just now, and we can cut into the actual track trial operation." "That's great." Burrell clenched his fists tightly. Although he tried to restrain himself, the veins on his red face still popped out. "We did it. We finally did it." Cheers broke out in the locomotive base instantly. The engineers and staff threw their hats up and shouted excitedly. Some even shed tears of excitement. In order to turn the steam locomotive from a drawing into a real thing that could run on the track, this group of people had put in a lot of hard work. They had worked late into the night, and hadn't returned home for months. All their hard work had paid off in an instant. When Meg saw this scene and heard the excited shouts, his heart also surged. Perhaps that group of great people felt the same way when they saw the mushroom cloud rising in the desert. "You have created a miracle," Meg said solemnly as he looked at Blair and all the engineers present. Although he was the one who provided the blueprint, it was indeed a miracle that a group of people who had no idea what a steam engine was or why it could push a bunch of wheels and carry a lot of heavy objects forward were able to build this steam locomotive bit by bit. Hill looked at this scene with a smile on her face. Although she did not understand the lines on the drawings, she knew how much work these engineers had done. The steam locomotive was completed half a month earlier than expected, giving them more time to carry out their plan. Now, there was probably nothing more important than time. After the steam locomotive passes the trial run, everyone can go home and have a month of paid vacation. In addition to the salary that will be paid to your families on time every month, you will also receive a bonus. Hill looked at everyone and smiled. The cheers stopped for a while, and then broke out into even more excited cheers. The bonus from Miss Hill had never disappointed anyone. With a generous bonus, they returned home after a few months of separation. The salary that had increased several times in the past few months was equivalent to several years of work in the past. A month of paid vacation could also make up for the time they were separated from their families. Blair and Meg discussed some technical issues, and then Meg and Hill left the base in the same carriage. I think we should have a drink. Hill looked at Meg, who was sitting opposite her, and said with a smile. This is a good suggestion, but it's a pity that I have to go back and prepare for the evening business. Meg smiled and glanced at his watch. Today was indeed a good day. Being able to see the steam locomotive traveling on the tracks of the other world and listening to the sound, Meg already felt that a new era was coming. The steam locomotive that spewed out white fog would inevitably change this world and accelerate the integration of this world. Violence could not solve the problem. The world that was unified by Qin Shi Huang was still divided and united in the end. Thus, they might as well break the borders and let them integrate with each other. In the past, they did not want to travel far because of the inconvenience of transportation. If they bought a train ticket at their doorstep, they could travel all over the world. With a wide range of knowledge, they would not be easily fooled into fighting and killing. In this world, in addition to fighting and killing, there was so many beautiful scenery and delicious food to enjoy. Why should they risk their lives for others? Meg did not hold the throat of this world's fate, but he might have thrown a handful of croton into the throat of this world. As for how it would develop next, he could only try his best to be on the same side as Chaos City and try his best to control the overturning dragon that was technology and stir up the integration of the world. However, it was best not to capsize the boat. Hill looked into Meg's eyes. Those clear eyes were still as calm as water. It was as if the steam locomotives coming online had nothing to do with him. This calmness and composure made her feel a little inferior. Although she looked very calm now, only she knew the feeling of her heart racing when she heard Meg say that the steam locomotive's test drive was successful. This could be an important moment that could change the world. Even when she was on the horse-drawn carriage, her mind was still a little muddled. However, Mag was the one who came up with the idea of the steam locomotive. He was also the one who drew the blueprint. Even the first model was made by him. However, other than showing some emotion when he was cheering with all the engineers in the cave, his expression and emotions didn't change much. In the future, you might be a tycoon who controls 10% of the world's transportation lifelines. Do you still care so much about cooking for your customers? Hill asked as she looked into Meg's eyes. Perhaps he had not realized what had just happened meant. When money reaches a certain amount, it is just a string of numbers. Miss Hill should know this better than I do. Meg looked at Hill with a smile, and said, however, the joy of cooking cannot be measured by money. Cooking for your customers and watching them immerse themselves in it and feel happy is a blissful thing. The system beeped. Chapter 14:11. The Hill was stunned for a moment. He looked at Meg in a different way. He was curious, surprised, and a little sympathetic. Yes. From the moment she was born, money was just a number to her. No one knew how much money Buffett banks had. It was a huge number that would make dragons and kings jealous. She knew. It was a string of meaningless numbers, at least to her. Yes, in fact, what's the use of money? What's the use of wealth? I've never touched money. I'm not interested in money. The Hill laughed self-deprecatingly. It's just that they all think I work hard for more money. Is there a difference between having more or less zeros behind that string of numbers? Meg looked at the Hill and suddenly fell into deep thought. It seemed that he had met his match. The way rich people pretended to be rich was always so similar. But he couldn't refute it. After all, he thought the same way back then. Yes, there's no difference. So he nodded in agreement. In fact, our family is just an ordinary family. There's nothing special about it. At most, our house is a little bigger. The Hill said with some helplessness, but when I was a child, every time I brought my friends home, I would always lose a few of them. Is it a big deal to get lost in someone else's house? That's not it. Meg shook his head. If it were him, his young heart couldn't accept such an invisible way of showing off his wealth. Mr. Meg, you're really special. The Hill smiled and gently touched a small raised bead beside his hand. The secretary quickly came in from outside the carriage and took out a bottle of red wine and 2 crystal goblets from the carriage's closet. He pulled the cork and a strong aroma of red wine spread in the carriage. He poured the red wine into a decanter to soak for a while, then poured it into the goblets and gently placed them on a small table between Meg and the hill. Then he bent over and left the carriage. "That's why I still want to have a drink with you." Hill raised his wine glass and swirled it between his fingers as he looked at Meg with a smile. Meg glanced at the wine glass in front of him and the Hill who was looking at him. He hesitated for a moment before reaching out to pick up the wine glass. "As you wish." Meg raised his glass and clinked it with Hill's before taking a sip of the wine. This was the best V-grade wine from Buffett Winery. It had a rich aroma and a mellow taste. It was slightly different from the system's special brews, but it was still a top-notch wine. Along the way, she spoke more than usual on the Hill. Although she still restrained herself and didn't talk too much about life, Meg clearly felt that her guard against him had dropped a lot. "Acting tough is probably a good way to get close to someone," Meg muttered as he got out of the carriage and watched the luxurious carriage gradually disappear into the distance. Meg turned around and saw Irina leaning against the door and sizing him up. "Where did you go?" Just as he was about to speak, Irina walked over with her long legs and sniffed him. "You reek of alcohol. Did someone ask you out for a drink in the middle of the day? And the smell of perfume. Woman. Then who was the woman in the carriage?" The series of questions and the dangerous aura in her eyes made Meg nervous. He answered honestly, "Hill Buffett, the current boss of Buffett Banks. I went to discuss a business deal worth a few $100 million with her at noon. It's normal to drink a little when discussing business." "A few $100 million?" Irina's eyes narrowed slightly. It was as if countless knives and swords were dancing in her eyes. Meg felt a chill run down his back. He quickly said, "It's not what you think. Come, let's go in. I'll tell you slowly. You'd better tell me what kind of posture you used to discuss a business deal worth a few $100 million. Irina's mouth curved into a dangerous arc. She turned and walked into the restaurant. I was just sitting." Meg looked innocent. What kind of posture could he use to discuss it? After entering the restaurant, Meg locked the door and made sure that there was no third person in the restaurant. He went to sit opposite Irina. "Can a rich woman make you feel happy?" Irina looked up and asked as soon as Meg sat down. "It's okay. We had a good talk, and the results were." Meg nodded and paused. He suddenly felt that his words sounded a little wrong. "Ha ha. Hey, honey, don't misunderstand. We're talking about business seriously," Meg said as he looked at Irina, who took out her foldable chair slowly. "Do you still remember the steam engines that the factory sent over a few days ago? Miss Hill is my collaborator on the steam engine project. Other than that, she, Chaos City, and I have also developed a railway project together. A steam locomotive powered by a steam engine will travel on the railway to the Goblin's Vic Mountain. A few years ago, I went to the locomotive base for a trial run, and it has basically reached the operating standards. That's why I drank some wine on the way back." "Steam locomotive?" Irina put down her foldable chair slowly and looked at Meg perplexedly. "It's a huge horse-drawn carriage that will never get tired. It can pull hundreds of people and move forward quickly on the paved railway. Furthermore, it doesn't need to rest or feed during the journey. Then, what does it eat? You'll be fine after eating some coal. Isn't that a little too much?" "It's okay. I'll even add water to it." "That's more like it." Meg looked at Irina, who kept her foldable chair, and heaved a sigh of relief. He put his butt back on the chair, and nodded with a smile. "Because the base is outside the city, Miss Hill sent me back on the way." Nothing happened. Irina glanced at Meg, and calmly said, "I'll just take it that way. That's clearly the way it is." Meg grumbled in his heart. However, it was better to keep it to himself. He smiled, and said, "It must have been very tiring for you to train the night elves today. Do you want to eat or drink anything? I'll make it for you." "I want to eat durian pizza and a pot of green tea," Irina said after thinking for a while. "All right, I'll make it for you." Meg got up and walked to the kitchen. He brewed a pot of green tea, poured a cup for Irina, and placed it in front of her. Then, he turned and went back to the kitchen to make the durian pizza. Irina propped her chin on her hand and rested it on the table. Through the steam, she looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen with his back facing her, and a smile appeared at the corner of her lips. He looked so handsome when he was holding a sword. He looked even more mesmerizing when he put on an apron and picked up a cleaver. Irina looked into Meg's eyes and pondered for a while. Then, she ate the small piece of pizza in her hand and revealed a smile. Sounds interesting. When the train starts running, I will try it. Oh, yes. Someone sent some steel parts to the factory this afternoon. They said they were custom-made by you. Are those the machines you were talking about? Irina suddenly recalled this matter. Yes. I will make a trip to the factory tomorrow to teach the night elves how to assemble the machines. After the machines are assembled and tested, we can start work. Meg nodded. After tea time, Meg cleared the table. Soon, Firis and Camilla arrived. Meg wrote a new product announcement on the notice board and hung it on the door. He had to complete the mission of making 100 durian pizzas well. Amy's was already known by everyone in Chaos City. It was undoubtedly the #1 restaurant. As for Duca's restaurant, which had dominated for many years, it quickly faded into the crowd. There were even people who divided the restaurants in Chaos City into two types, Amy's and other restaurants. And the extremely high reputation brought about an increasing number of customers. In order to make it easier for the customers to line up, the Aiden Square management even opened up a small path in front of the restaurant so that the queuing crowd could extend into the square. And Amy's popularity also made the southwest corner of Aiden Square, which originally had no commercial vibes, become lively. Many dilapidated shops were rented at high prices, and shops and restaurants opened one after another. A new hot spot in the business circle appeared. As the customers who came late and couldn't make it in time were diverted to those restaurants, it brought them a lot of traffic. It's only 4:30 p.m. Is this even fun? Tony stood outside Amy's and looked at the long line that extended into the square. He felt that he had shown enough respect by coming to line up half an hour earlier. He didn't expect that he still underestimated the coachman's words. You must line up early. Otherwise, you won't even be qualified to line up. I want to see if the taste is right for such a long line. Tony slowly made his way to the back of the line, but he was still calm. After all, he wasn't hungry now. Hurry up, the line is about to reach the limit. If you miss it, you'll have to wait until tomorrow if you want to eat spicy hot pot. A group of people hurriedly jogged past Tony and ran to the back of the line. Why are they in such a hurry? Tony frowned, and then looked back. There were about a dozen people running toward him with menacing expressions. Holy fuck. Tony's footsteps unconsciously quickened. He could feel the breathing behind him getting closer and closer, and he couldn't help but start running. When he finally reached the back of the line, he immediately lined up at the back and heaved a sigh of relief. Sure enough, after 3 more people lined up behind him, a beautiful lady came over with a wooden sign and asked the customer to help her hold the sign to inform them that the line had ended. Tony heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Vanessa, who was also panting slightly, in front of him, and asked, "Miss, are all your meals so exciting? We went out to play today and didn't pay attention to the time, so we almost missed it. Usually, we line up an hour earlier. If we line up at the front, we can quickly eat delicious food. When it's our turn today, I don't know if we can still eat hot pot." Vanessa glanced at Tony, a demon uncle who looked quite energetic, and said regretfully, "Hot pot. Is it a hot pot?" It was the first time Tony heard of this dish, and he couldn't help but be curious. "No, it's a kind of cooking method. Is this your first time at Amy's? Then you can try it. It's super delicious," Vanessa said with a smile, revealing a mouth of neat and beautiful teeth. Chapter 14:13. All right, I'll think about it. Tony also nodded with a smile. He was rather surprised that this beautiful human girl wasn't fearful of him at all. As expected, Chaos City was very special. There were all kinds of races everywhere, and everyone lived in harmony with one another. Ever since he had arrived here, he hadn't received any strange looks. Even the elves didn't deliberately avoid him or show any hostility toward him. Laura glanced at Tony with a wary expression. She wanted the princess to stand in front of her, but the lava demons in front of her looked even more ferocious. After some consideration, she decided not to say anything. Abraham, who was standing in the other line, wasn't worried at all. He also really liked the atmosphere of Chaos City, and Mammoth's atmosphere was like a miniature version of Chaos City. Furthermore, it was an atmosphere that had been optimized by the rules of Chaos City. People gathered here because of delicious food, and because they cherished delicious food, they set aside their prejudices and truly accepted each other, interacting with one another in an equal manner. An opportunity like this would never appear in Rodu. With his and Vanessa's status, no one would be able to converse with them on an equal footing. He could tell that Vanessa also liked this kind of life, so in the letter he sent back to the king the day before, he promised that he would send Vanessa back to Chaos City in person after a month. "Mister, you don't seem to be from Chaos City, right? Where did you come from? Did you also come here for Mammoth?" Vanessa asked as she looked at Tony with a curious expression. After coming to Chaos City, her thirst for knowledge that had been repressed for several years was gradually being released. She was also very curious about other people's stories. Every time she lined up, she would find an opportunity to chat with other customers. The stories and experiences that she heard from these people were very different from the stories written by the literati that she read in books. Some of them were ordinary, some of them were exciting, but they were often more realistic and full of the atmosphere of the marketplace. Tony adjusted his clothes, but his words were stuck in his throat as soon as he opened his mouth. He liked to introduce himself, and then see the surprise, elation, and luck on the faces of others after hearing his name. But now, he was someone who had come out to avoid the limelight. He couldn't be recognized. Who knew how many of his fans were in this long line? Who knew if someone would hand him a knife on the spot? Hired someone? Vanessa looked at Tony in confusion. Did Mr. Mac hire someone else too? Yes, I'm Thomas. I just came to Chaos City from the Demon Islands. I heard that this restaurant is pretty good, so I came to try it. However, I didn't come here specifically for it. He had no choice but to make up a name for himself. After that, he didn't forget to add, "There's only one restaurant in this world that I would go to specially for him. However, it's not in Chaos City. It's on Carapace Island in the Demon Islands." "Are you talking about i.e. Crayfish Restaurant on Carapace Island?" Vanessa asked with a smile. "Yes. How did you know?" Tony jumped half a step back and stared at Vanessa. Did this maiden already recognize him? Vanessa smiled, and said, "I just read Teacher Tony's article on Eat the World magazine yesterday. It mentioned i.e. Crayfish Restaurant on Carapace Island. The spicy crayfish, garlic crayfish, and 13-spice crayfish made me hungry in the middle of the night." He said what you just said in the article. There's only one restaurant in this world that he would go to specially for, and it's on Carapace Island in the Demon Islands. I see. Tony heaved a sigh of relief. So, this maiden had read his article. He couldn't help but smile smugly. As a food critic, his favorite compliment was of course words that made people hungry. This was probably the same sense of accomplishment as when a chef's food was praised. "I heard that many people are already on their way. If it's not good, they're prepared to team up and kill Teacher Tony," Vanessa said with a nod. "Are the readers so cruel these days?" Tony stared and suddenly panicked. Haha, don't the magazine have readers' comments every issue? There seemed to be quite a number of gourmets who were killed because of their recommendations. Moreover, I heard that there was once a gourmet who went on an offline date with a beautiful fan. In the end, the other party turned out to be a cross-dresser. After that, that gourmet went silent for a period of time. When he appeared again, his style of writing became gay. Vanessa nodded. She was like a different person when it came to gossip about the food industry. "I'm scared." Tony's face was filled with fear. Was it that dangerous to write a food review article? However, I really like Teacher Tony's article about seafood. I feel that he's indeed the gourmet who knows seafood the best in this world. However, I don't agree with what he said. If there's a restaurant in this world that's worth you packing your bags and going to specially for, it would definitely be Immerse, Vanessa said with certainty. How is that possible? Teacher Tony must be right. How can there be anything more delicious than the crayfish from IE Crayfish restaurant in this world? Tony was unconvinced. Although this lady was his hardcore fan, he would never give in when it came to matters of principle. Looks like you're also a fan of Teacher Tony. Vanessa looked at Tony in surprise and continued, I feel that Teacher Tony is good in everything, but the biggest problem is that he has too much prejudice against other dishes. Moreover, he's always staying in the Demon Islands and isn't willing to go to other places to look. Chapter 14:14. Today's new product announcement, a strange fruit with a mysterious fragrance. What kind of deliciousness will blossom in my hands? Please look forward to today's new product, durian pizza, limited to 100 servings for today's release. The notice hanging on the restaurant's door had been read countless times by the customers passing by. Every time it was read, it strengthened the customers' memories. Limited. This was a very important keyword because it often meant that it was a best-selling product and not easy to eat. Just like the tofu pudding that was released to 400 servings, if one queued up late, they might not be able to eat it. A limited product appeared again, and it was actually limited as soon as it was released. Other than the tofu pudding and Buddha jumps over the wall, this was very rare in Immerse. Many people were already guessing what the mysterious fruit was. With Mr. Mac's usual cold and aloof style, such a new product announcement was also very rare. The customers' curiosity was piqued by many doubts, and they started to have endless thoughts about the so-called durian pizza. The new product is actually limited to 100 servings. There's no need to look, it won't be our turn to eat it. Vanessa sighed dejectedly as she listened to the discussions of the customers in front of her. She suddenly regretted going out to play this afternoon. She even missed the time to queue up. Was there anything more important in this world than eating? Isn't it just a new product? Why is everyone so excited? Tony was a little puzzled. Vanessa turned to look at Tony and said seriously, because every time Mr. Mac releases a new product, it means that there's another delicious food in the world. Isn't this a very important thing? If that's the case, then it is indeed a very important thing. Tony also nodded solemnly. As a gourmet, if what this young lady said was true, then this was indeed a very important thing. Boss, will the customers be unable to accept the smell of the durian? Mia asked worriedly as she looked at Meg, who was putting on an apron. Although the durian pizza was extremely delicious, if it was the first time someone smelled the durian, they might feel a little uncomfortable. It's okay, we just have to sell it. Once it's on the table, they have to eat it. As long as they move their mouths, then they lose. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. Judging from the expressions of the guests, the proposal he had written was beginning to take effect. If they taste it themselves, they will definitely fall in love with the taste. Mia nodded in agreement. The durian pizza had a magical charm that made people reluctant to part with it after eating it. All right, get ready. We're about to open for business. Meg straightened his chef's uniform and strode toward the entrance of the restaurant. He pushed the door open and smiled at the customers lining up outside. Welcome to Immerse. Mr. Mac, there are more and more people here, Crassus said with a smile as he walked in. Thank you for liking it. Meg also responded with a smile. He didn't know where so many customers came from, and this was after the restaurant's high price. Mr. Mac, what's this durian pizza today? Meat dishes? Vegetarian dishes? Or is it dessert? Harrison asked curiously as he walked in. Many customers who were about to enter also looked at Meg curiously. After being brainwashed by the mysterious new product for an hour, their minds were now filled with the durian pizza. There are pictures on the menu. You'll see when you take a seat, Meg said with a smile. He didn't reveal it directly. Hearing that, everyone quickly took their seats. Then, they eagerly flipped open the menu on the table and found today's new product under desserts, the durian pizza. The round pizza was cut into 6 triangular pieces. There were a little bit of burnt yellow in the golden color. The bright color looked very attractive and coveted. However, the price of this durian pizza wasn't so friendly. 6-inch durian pizza, 500 copper coins, 12-inch durian pizza, 1,000 copper coins. This price made some customers who wanted to try the new product flinch. After all, it looked like a dessert. 500 copper coins could buy a set of tofu pudding and rugiamo. However, this didn't stop most customers from ordering. "I'd like a 12-inch durian pizza," Harrison said to Yarbemia, who came to his side. "A 12-inch pizza is enough for 2 to 3 people. Are you sure you want to order a 12-inch durian pizza?" Mia looked at Harrison. Gyurge wasn't with him today. Harrison thought for a while, and said, "In that case, I think I should add a beggar's chicken. Otherwise, I won't be full." "Okay, please wait a moment." Mia nodded and walked to the next table. "Father, look, the one behind Sister Windsor. Doesn't he look like the uncle who often came to the restaurant when we were on the island?" Amy ran around the entrance of the restaurant, and then ran back to Meg, who was still standing at the entrance. She asked him to bend down and whispered in his ear. "Oh!" Meg straightened up when he heard that. He looked at the back of the line, and his eyes lit up when he saw Tony. "Hihi, so it's that gourmet bro. Did he go out to seek refuge?" Meg even bought a gourmet magazine when he came back, and read Tony's gourmet reviews in it. To be fair, Tony's reviews were not bad. There was some substance to them, and he deserved to be popular. He was different from a food blogger like him, who relied on his face to make a living. Of course, not everyone could rely on their face like him. However, why did this gourmet, who claimed that he would die on the Demon Islands, and would never leave the seafood sanctuary, and would die if he didn't eat seafood for a day, come to Chaos City? Meg turned and walked in. He told Yarbemia to ask the customer behind Vanessa to sit outside the restaurant. Then, he told Jane that she could work in the restaurant during the opening hours, and she didn't have to go out. The family of 3 didn't have to worry about being exposed. After all, they had disguised themselves back then. If they took off a pair of pincers and pulled off a beard, who would be able to tell that they were? Who would know that he was Hades? Amy had changed her clothes, so it shouldn't be easy to tell. As for Irina, she wasn't even in the restaurant now. She should have gone to train the night elves. Those elves who had been imprisoned and enslaved didn't cultivate properly at all. She needed to teach them how to cultivate and how to fight. Hence, Jane became the only possible breakthrough point that could be recognized. Of course, Meg wasn't too worried that Tony would recognize them. He had already thought of many reasons for Jane. If they really couldn't be reasoned with, then they could only silence him. Meg was still more merciful to his peers. Of course, his peers were chefs now. Chapter 14-15. Before long, the durian pizza orders had exceeded 30 orders. Meg nodded in satisfaction and officially started to make the durian pizza. Due to the unique smell of the durian pizza, Mia adjusted the seats of the customers to ensure that the customers who did not order the durian pizza would not be affected. Although the probability of stepping on a landmine at Amy's was very low, many customers still had a scrutinizing attitude towards new products. It was obviously a better choice to let others try it first and see the evaluation before deciding whether to order it or not. "Luna, are you okay?" Vivian looked at Luna, who was sitting beside her with a pale face, and asked worriedly, "Does your stomach still hurt?" "I'm fine." Luna shook her head and pressed her lower abdomen with her hand. There were some fine beads of sweat on her forehead and her lips were a little blue from biting them. There were no classes in the afternoon, so Luna and Vivian agreed to go shopping and eat. However, her lower abdomen began to hurt from the moment she started to line up. It was so painful that she could not stand. When she sat down in the restaurant, the pain was still a little unbearable. It seemed that her period had come 2 days earlier this month. Ever since her first period came when she was 14 years old, she would feel cold and painful. This situation had continued until now. Those few days of every month were the most painful for her. Therefore, whenever her period came, she would take a leave of absence and lie at home, hugging a hot water bottle and lying like a corpse for an entire day. After enduring the most painful 2 days, she would come back to life and teach the students. Why don't we go back first? Your situation doesn't seem too good. Vivian wiped Luna's cold sweat with a handkerchief. When she felt that her hand and forehead were cold, her expression became a little nervous. She knew about Luna's situation, but she did not say anything when she was lining up. When she sat down, she could not help but show it. Seeing her like this, how could she bear to see her like this? She wanted to quickly send her home to lie down. No, didn't you just order a durian pizza? It's Mr. Meg's new product. You like it every time. It's a pity to leave now. Luna shook her head and forced a smile. I'm fine. I'll be fine in a while. You. Vivian was a little exasperated at the sight of Luna's stubborn expression. She hurriedly gestured for MIA to come over as she pleaded, Big Sister MA, can you give me a cup of hot water? Luna isn't feeling too well. Okay, please wait a moment. MIA looked at Luna, who didn't look too good. She quickly nodded and turned to the kitchen. Soon, she came out with a cup of warm water and gently placed it in front of Luna. Thank you. Luna thanked him and reached out to hold the cup. The heat from the quilt dispelled the chill a lot, and the pain also eased a little. Are you feeling better? Vivian asked nervously. Millimeter, I'm fine. It's been so many years, and I'm already used to it. It's not like you don't know. Vivian glared at her with self-reproach, and said, I'm just worried because I know. You've always been in so much pain. If I knew you were coming today, I definitely wouldn't have asked you to come out. I'll go back and get some sleep. I'll be fine tomorrow, Luna said with a gentle smile. Vivian looked at Luna with heartache, but there was nothing she could do. Even the doctors couldn't do anything about her condition. They all said that it was due to her constitution, and that she would be fine after enduring those 2 days every month. However, there was no good way to treat her condition. They could only eat something and send Luna home early to rest. Amy came over to greet Luna and Vivian before running off to play with Ugly Duckling. Teacher Luna doesn't seem to be feeling too well, MIA said casually as she went into the kitchen to bring out the dishes. Meg turned to look into the restaurant upon hearing that, and his gaze landed on Luna, who was holding a cup with one hand and pressing her lower abdomen with the other. Her face was slightly pale, and she did seem to be feeling unwell. Meg casually clicked on Luna's information that he had skipped before, and then saw in her status bar, signs of red buff, continuous loss of health points. Meg pondered for a moment before asking, did Teacher Luna and the others order pizza? Yes, a 12-inch pizza. MIA nodded. Ding. Just then, the oven's notification sounded. Serve the other guests' pizzas according to the usual order. Give this to Teacher Luna and the others first. Meg took out the durian pizzas from the oven one by one, and baked 8 12-inch durian pizzas at once. All right. Yabemia nodded, covered the durian pizzas, and carried them out, placing them in front of the guests one by one. The 8th pizza was directly brought to Luna's table. 12-inch durian pizza, please enjoy. Yabemia smiled, and then reached out to lift the lid of the durian pizza. A gust of hot air carrying the rich aroma of durian and cream instantly spread in the enclosed space. This smell. Vivian and Luna, like all the other guests who received the durian pizzas, covered their noses at the same time at the strange smell. The guests at the table next to them were even more exaggerated. They suddenly leaned back and flipped over with their chairs, lying on the ground with a look of horror and confusion on their faces. Many of the guests directly jumped up from their chairs, backed out of the dining area, and then gasped for air. Is it that exaggerated? Is it as smelly as stinky tofu? 1,000 copper coins for something that can't be eaten? The other guests looked at this scene curiously. They were surprised, and some were gloating, and some were thinking about the wisdom of not ordering the food. This smell is too strong, isn't it? It's a little overpowering. Although Harrison was still sitting in the chair, he didn't look too good. He couldn't tell what the smell was. It didn't smell bad, but it didn't smell good. He couldn't quite accept the smell. Anyway, it felt a little awkward. Although Vivian was still sitting, she could not help but mumble as she looked at the durian pizza in front of her. Could it be that Mr. Mac also has times when he makes mistakes? Luna put down her hand at some point, and sniffed lightly. Her eyes lit up, and she said, "I think it's all right. It's just baked to a golden color, and it looks very appetizing. Also, if you smell it carefully, it's actually a very special aroma. It's mixed with the aroma of cream, so it should be very delicious." "Really?" Vivian let go of the hand that was covering her nose skeptically, and tried to sniff it. After what Luna said, the smell was indeed not as bad as before, but she still did not want to try this pizza with such a strange smell. "I didn't want to eat at first, but after smelling this aroma, I'm a little hungry. Let me try it first." Luna saw that Vivian was a little disgusted, and reached out with a smile to pinch a triangular piece of pizza. She lifted it up, and pulled out a long strand. From the cut surface, she could see that the yellow durian meat took up more than half of the thickness. The aroma together with the heat wafted over, and made her forget the pain for a moment. "Eat it," Luna said to Vivian, and then took a bite of the pizza. "It's so delicious, but it's hidden so deeply. How naughty," Vivian muttered. She couldn't help but continue to eat the pizza, immersing herself in the happiness brought by the durian pizza. Seeing the two beautiful ladies, Vivian and Luna, eating so happily, the customers who were debating whether they should return the food hesitated for a moment before returning to their seats. "Take good care of my seventh uncle." Harrison picked up a slice of pizza and bit off half of it. Fuck. A mouthful of durian made him lose his mind instantly. His mind was completely blank, and only the word fuck could express his inner feelings at this moment. Compared to that strange taste, the taste of this durian pizza was much easier to accept. No, it should be said that it was much easier to be conquered by it. There were many kinds of delicacies at Amy's, but the deliciousness of the durian pizza was unique and irresistible. "Brother, is this pizza really delicious?" The young demon at the same table asked as he looked at Harrison, who was eating a slice of pizza in a few bites. "Delicious? This word isn't strong enough. It should be extremely delicious. Durian pizza, fucking delicious." Harrison gave a thumbs up, almost waving the flag and shouting. No matter, from today onwards, he was the #1 follower of durian pizza. Harrison's slightly exaggerated eating manners and heartfelt praise made the customers who were still hesitating start to try it. He was a regular in the restaurant, and many people saw him often. There was no need to lie. "Isn't this durian pizza too delicious? Is this made with tofu pudding? How can the taste be so wonderful?" Soon, praises for the durian pizza could be heard everywhere in the restaurant. After tasting it for themselves, everyone's first impression of the durian pizza was overturned. They became immersed in it and willingly became its captives. The taste was irresistible. The huge contrast between the taste of the durian pizza before and after the customers tasted it also spurred the customers who were still hesitating to order the pizza. However, there were also some customers who were defeated by the strange taste and chose food that was more acceptable. Meg looked at the durian pizza orders, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. It was a very good start. Perhaps he could complete 100 orders tonight. Although today's announcement was a bit deceptive, there was no such thing as too much deception in war. Everyone wanted to step into the delicious trap. As expected of Mr. Mac. He never disappoints. Vivian licked her fingers, covered her mouth, and burped. The satisfaction of eating half a durian pizza was overflowing on her face. She was really too happy. "I'm so full too." Luna touched her slightly bulging stomach with some guilt. Suddenly, she was stunned. "What's wrong? Does it still hurt?" Vivian also suddenly remembered that Luna had a stomachache just now. She was too engrossed in eating and forgot about it. "No, it doesn't hurt now. After eating this durian pizza, it suddenly doesn't hurt anymore." Luna shook her head with a look of surprise. "Really?" Vivian grabbed Luna's hand in surprise. Her cold hand had become very warm now. Her eyes lit up. Really, even your hand has become warm. I didn't expect this durian pizza to have such a magical effect. Yes, this is the first time this has happened. Rena nodded. This was an illness that had been bothering her for years, and she didn't expect it to be suppressed by half a durian pizza. Mr. Mac is really a strange doctor and a god of cooking. Should we give him a plaque that says Gynecology Sage? Vivian whispered in Luna's ear. Don't. Then I won't know how to face Mr. Meg in the future. Luna glared at Vivian with some reproach. Okay. After all, our teacher Luna still has to maintain the elegant demeanor of a teacher in front of Mr. Mac. Vivian nodded with a smile and said, how about this? Let's eat durian pizza again tomorrow for 3 days and see how it goes. Chapter 14-17. How long do we have to wait before we can eat? Tony wasn't hungry at first, but as he waited, he started to feel hungry. The line was moving forward slowly, but the speed was too slow. They had been waiting for almost 2 hours, but it was still far from their turn. If they were on the Demon Islands, they wouldn't have to wait in line when they heard that he was coming. They would welcome him in like a boss. This was the first time they had to wait in line for such a long time. I've counted the number of people. It will be our turn in about half an hour. It's a pity that we only have half an hour to eat. We probably won't be able to eat hot pot today. The new dish is definitely gone. Vanessa stood on her tiptoes and looked forward. She was still in high spirits, as if she didn't feel that waiting in line was tiring at all. She just felt that it was a pity that she wouldn't be able to eat hot pot and the new dish. Abraham's head was drooping, and he was already drowsy. He was following the line slowly and unconsciously. Half an hour. Tony's eyes widened, but when he saw the customers lining up calmly, even the irascible demons were lining up obediently, he resisted the urge to complain. He thought to himself, I'd like to see what kind of magic this restaurant has to be able to make so many customers line up here willingly. And that crayfish, how can there be any crayfish in this world that can be compared to the crayfish from IE Crayfish Restaurant? After about half an hour, they finally reached the end of the line. Yarbemia glanced at Vanessa and the others, as well as the demon uncle behind them. She walked out of the door with a smile and guided them to their seats outside the restaurant. There are no seats in the restaurant at the moment. The designated hot pot area has also stopped accepting new customers. Dear customers, please eat here and take a look at the menu. Big sister MIA, are there any more of the new dish that was released today? Vanessa asked expectantly as soon as she sat down. The 100 pieces of durian pizza have all been sold. If you want to eat it, you can come over earlier tomorrow. Yarbemia shook her head slightly. Is there no more tofu pudding? Yes, the tofu pudding is also sold out. Yarbemia nodded. Ah, sure enough, you can be late for anything, but you definitely can't be late for a meal at Mamis. Vanessa lamented, feeling as if she had missed out on a priceless treasure. Tony and Vanessa shared a table. Although it was a little strange for them to dine outside the restaurant since this restaurant was so beautiful, there were many open-air restaurants on the Demon Islands. Hence, they didn't think too much about it. They picked up the menu and flipped it open. Their eyes lit up when they saw the pictures of the dishes on the menu. Every dish was accompanied by a picture, and the pictures looked like they were recorded with a photostone. They looked very real and didn't look like they were drawn. Just looking at the pictures made one feel very hungry. What surprised him was the prices of the dishes. He scanned the dishes from top to bottom. The cheapest dish was 100 copper coins per bowl of soy milk, while the most expensive dish, Buddha Jumps Over the Wall soup, cost 10,000 copper coins per unit. 10,000 copper coins. Tony's eyes widened, and he looked at the price incredulously. The prices of the dishes in this restaurant were so expensive. He had been on the Demon Islands for many years, and he had never seen such an exaggerated menu. This is a scam, right? I can get a delicious spicy crayfish at the Demon Islands with 100 copper coins, but I can only get a bowl of white soy milk here, Tony muttered to himself. He wasn't actually short of money. As a gourmet who was paid handsomely, even if he ordered all the dishes on the menu, he would only feel a little heartache. Then, his gaze landed on the braised crayfish. His eyes lit up when he saw the bright red crayfish with big pincers in the picture. He said in surprise, "Isn't this the same crayfish from IE restaurant?" Then, his gaze landed on the price. Fuck. Braised crayfish, 1,000 copper coins per crayfish. It was 10 times more expensive. Uncle, how is it? Isn't Mr. Mac selling his crayfish very conscientious? Vanessa smiled at Tony, who was staring at the crayfish. Conscientious? Ha! The crayfish on Carapace Island are 10 times cheaper than this. Tony rolled his eyes. But this is Chaos City. There's no sea, so it's super difficult to get fresh seafood. You can probably only get it at Mammoth, Vanessa said with a smile. Seafood will die very quickly once it leaves the sea. Hence, it's impossible for fresh seafood to appear in Chaos City. I think it's a little expensive to sell a dead crayfish for 1,000 copper coins. After all, IE Crayfish Restaurant's crayfish is only 100 copper coins per crayfish, and it's the best delicacy. Tony shook his head, and disagreed with Vanessa. Not necessarily. I've tried the freshest seafood, but I don't think it's more delicious than Mr. Mac's crayfish. In terms of taste, it can't be compared at all. I think the price of 1,000 copper coins is totally worth it. Furthermore, I think Mr. Mac's braised crayfish won't taste worse than the crayfish that teacher Tony recommends. Vanessa insisted. Then, she looked at Yarbemia, and said, "Big sister Ame, I want a crayfish, and then a huge helping of insanely spicy grilled fish. Then, I'll try this crayfish too." Tony was a little indignant. He also ordered a braised crayfish. When he saw beer in the beer section, he also ordered a cold beer. He wanted to see if the quality of this restaurant's beer could reach the standard of IE Crayfish Restaurant. Abraham, who was still leisurely thinking about what to eat for dinner, sat up straight when he heard Vanessa's words. Chapter 14:18. There seemed to be some kind of magic barrier that prevented the cold wind from blowing in. Instead, it was very warm and comfortable. Tony nestled in his chair comfortably. It was not completely unreasonable to say that it was expensive. Although there were guests of different races around, it wasn't noisy at all. Even the demons and dwarfs at the side were whispering to each other in hushed voices. Sitting in such a place to eat made one's spirit relax. Such a scene could not be seen in other restaurants. "Hello, here are your braised crayfish." Not long after, Yarbemia walked out with a tray, and placed the crayfish in front of everyone one by one. "Smells so good." Tony sat up straight in his chair, and stared at the red crayfish on the big black plate. "Isn't this the spicy crayfish?" The crayfish with its big pincers looked exactly the same as the crayfish he had at IE Crayfish Restaurant. Be it the size or the appearance, there was almost no difference. Tony suppressed the difference in his heart, and sniffed seriously. There was indeed a difference in the aroma. The garlic crayfish was full of garlic, the spicy crayfish was spicy and fresh, and the 13-spice crayfish was rich and fragrant. However, this so-called braised crayfish had a more restrained taste. It was less spicy than the spicy crayfish, and less fragrant than the 13-spice crayfish. However, it was this half-concealed feeling that made one even more curious about what kind of taste was hidden in this crayfish. Strange. Could this boss have gone to Carapace Island to get ingredients? Or are these crayfish produced in other places too? Tony was a little puzzled. He had stayed on the Demon Islands for so many years, and had never eaten crayfish that looked like this before IE Crayfish Restaurant. He didn't expect to see it again after coming to Chaos City. Today's crayfish still smells so good. "I'm going to dig in," Vanessa said with a smile. She had already grabbed a pincer, and broke off the shell. Then, she took a bite of the plump pincer and indulged in the scrumptious taste. Seems like the way they are eaten is similar. Tony was deep in thought. He retracted his gaze from Vanessa, and looked at the prawns in front of him. He thought to himself, although they look about the same, appearance alone is useless. This prawn is definitely not fresh, and the taste is definitely not on the same level as Boss Hades's. With the mentality of trying it casually and then preparing to release a wave of ridicule after eating, Tony reached out and broke off the prawn's head. This fragrance. A rich fragrance gushed out along with the steam, and the restrained fragrance suddenly bloomed. Tony's eyes couldn't help but light up. It was an unexpected fragrance. Then he picked up the prawn head, put it to his mouth and took a bite. Oh, this damned delicacy. How can this shrimp butter be so delicious and sweet? Tony revealed a shocked expression as he looked at the prawn head in his hand in disbelief. The prawn butter melted in his mouth without the slightest fishy taste. There was a hint of spiciness amidst the sweetness, and the restrained fragrance was perfectly displayed in this mouthful of prawn butter. Fresh. This was the most intuitive embodiment. As a gourmet who claimed to know seafood the best, he clearly knew that this was definitely cooked with fresh crayfish. It could even wave its pincers a second before it was put into the pot. Other than that, the delicacy made him gasp in amazement. It was different from the garlic fragrance of the garlic crayfish, the spicy and fresh fragrance of the spicy crayfish, and the rich and intoxicating feeling of the 13-spice crayfish. This braised crayfish gave him a different feeling. The delicacy of the spices and crayfish was stewed into the crayfish, and only by opening the hard shell could one enjoy the delicacy. It was a pleasant surprise. How can it be so delicious? Although there are some differences in the taste and cooking method, it doesn't lose to the crayfish made by Boss Hades at all. Tony's mind was completely blank, and the thought of eating it had been completely thrown to the back of his mind. After eating the prawn butter in the prawn head, Tony broke off a pincer and took a bite of the prawn meat. The springy prawn meat had the freshness that belonged to the ocean, and it confirmed his judgment that this was the freshest prawn. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was just fished out from the sea. The fresh and sweet prawn meat was soaked in the gravy, and the freshness was completely stimulated. It was completely different from its dry appearance. When he bit into it, the juices were overflowing, and it was very fresh and fragrant. Love. There was only one thought left in Tony's mind. He was addicted to the satisfaction of eating the prawn meat bite after bite. After eating the 2 pincers, he had a mouthful of foamy beer. This feeling was great. Uncle, how is it? Isn't the crayfish made by Mr. Mac super delicious? Isn't the prawn super fresh? Vanessa asked Tony with a smile. This. Tony blushed. He had refuted Vanessa's words righteously just now, but after tasting the delicious crayfish with his own mouth, he couldn't say those words. I admit that this crayfish is indeed very delicious, and the prawn is unexpectedly fresh. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was just fished out from the sea. I take back what I said just now. Tony nodded. As a gourmet, he also had his own professional integrity. He couldn't say anything that went against his heart. Vanessa continued to ask, how does it compare to the IE Crayfish restaurant on Carapace Island? After reading Teacher Tony's article, I'm quite interested in the 3 flavors of crayfish. If there's a chance, I'd like to try it. These are crayfish with completely different flavors. However, if you must compare them, the difference is probably the price. On Carapace Island, you can eat 10 crayfish of the same standard for the same price. Tony looked at Vanessa with an awkward expression, and said, however, I don't really recommend you to go to Carapace Island. After all, the Demon Islands are quite chaotic. Carapace Island is the real chaotic island, and it's not suitable for a beautiful young lady like you. He was afraid that this young lady would join the group that wanted to kill him. Moreover, Carapace Island was indeed very chaotic. If a beautiful young lady like her went there, anything could happen. Yes, yes, yes. Why would a young lady like you go to the Demon Islands? Is the tofu pudding not delicious, or is the spicy grilled fish not spicy enough? Abraham hurriedly chimed in. This little brat was already under a lot of pressure in Chaos City. If she were to go to the Demon Islands, the king would most likely tear him to shreds. Really? I don't think so. Before I came to Chaos City, I also heard that Chaos City was very chaotic. However, after I came here, I realized that this place is quite good. Maybe Carapace Island is also good, Vanessa said innocently. Young mistress, but there's no hot pot on Carapace Island, Laura reminded her softly. Then, I'm not going. Vanessa didn't even think about it. No pop-up window. Chapter 14:19. The crayfish was quickly finished by Tony, but he was still somewhat unsatisfied. However, the seafood that he ate in Chaos City gave him a huge surprise. After IE Crayfish Restaurant went missing for no reason, he was still lamenting that he might not be able to eat such delicious crayfish in his lifetime. He didn't expect that he would be able to eat the same delicious braised crayfish here after leaving the Demon Islands. To be fair, this was the king of the crayfish that was on par with the spicy crayfish, garlic crayfish, and 13-spice crayfish. If it weren't for the fact that he was currently on the run, he would definitely write a long article tonight and brag about it. Is your seafood so easy to get? Tony asked Vanessa curiously as he put down his empty beer glass. These crayfish were way too fresh, and there were so many customers who ordered it. Where did all these fresh crayfish come from? Also, is this beer a specialty here? This beer gave him a very familiar feeling. It was very similar to the beer in IE Crayfish Restaurant. He suddenly felt like he was back on Carapace Island when he was eating the crayfish and drinking the beer here. I don't know about the seafood, but it shouldn't be so easy to get. As for the beer, I don't drink, so I don't know if it's a specialty here. Is it good? Vanessa shook her head, and then looked at Tony's beer glass with curiosity. She was eager to try it. No, it's bitter. Children can't drink it, Abraham answered immediately. He definitely couldn't let Vanessa try drinking alcohol. Really? But I saw that everyone looked very happy when they were drinking it. Vanessa didn't believe him. Adults have thousands of different kinds of bitterness. In comparison, this bit of bitterness in beer is nothing. Drinking a little will make you feel better, Abraham said calmly. Beer is for adults. Children won't grow up if they drink it, Tony chimed in. All right. I'll just drink my fruit juice then. Vanessa nodded. She looked at the beer with a sly look in her eyes. Your insanely spicy grilled fish. Yarbemia cleared everyone's plates, and quickly served a huge grilled fish in the middle of the table. What is this? Why is it so dazzling? Tony leaned back with tears in his eyes after being hit by the hot air. The tingling sensation made him feel that his tears were no longer under his control. Abraham had already moved his chair back a little, and he was staring at the spicy grilled fish with an expression as if he had seen a ghost. He felt as if something deep within his soul was trembling uncontrollably. Was his fragile anus going to be ravaged again? In contrast, Vanessa was elated as she took a deep sniff of the fish, and an elated smile appeared on her face as she said to Tony, "So this is the insanely spicy grilled fish. It's super delicious, and this fish is so big. You should eat it as well, Uncle." Tony tried to alleviate the irritation in his eyes as he looked at the grilled fish that was covered in red chili. He hadn't even eaten it yet, but he could already feel his throat burning. Was this how people in Chaos City ate chili? Even the spicy crayfish that he found spicy previously paled in comparison to this. This was indeed his first time encountering a dish that was so spicy to his eyes just from the taste alone. Don't tell me you don't dare to eat it. Vanessa blinked. How could I not dare to eat it? This level of spiciness is nothing to demons like us. Tony chuckled with disdain. Wow, that sounds awesome. Vanessa's eyes lit up. Hee hee. Tony forced a smile onto his face, but he was already feeling very bitter inside. How could he brag so casually? Then let's dig in. It's the best when it's just grilled. Vanessa had already picked up her chopsticks eagerly, and put a piece of fish into her mouth. Her cheeks flushed a little, but her expression was quite joyful as she enjoyed the feeling of her taste buds being defenseless in the face of the insanely spicy grilled fish. Could it be that it doesn't taste as spicy as it smells? Even a little girl like her doesn't have any reaction after eating it, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? Tony thought to himself. He didn't want to be looked down upon by a little girl. He picked up his chopsticks and peeled off the chili before picking up a piece of fish. After thinking for a while, he dipped it in the gravy before putting it into his mouth. There didn't seem to be anything special in the first instant when the fish entered his mouth. Under the crispy fish skin was fresh and tender. It was very rare to be able to eat such perfectly grilled fish on the Demon Islands. However, the calmness was completely broken the moment the gravy touched his taste bud. Spiciness? No. It was pain. It was as if someone had pulled his tongue out of his mouth, and then a dwarf blacksmith had swung his heavy hammer and smashed it heavily on his tongue. His delicate tongue and those sensitive taste buds were smashed by this hammer, and he almost forgot who his mother was. His face turned red in an instant. It wasn't just a slight redness, it was as red as a tomato, and steam was rising from his head. He felt as if all the cells in his body were boiling, as if countless violent factors were running amok in his body. After the momentary pain, the spiciness officially made its appearance. This wasn't an ordinary spiciness. This kind of spiciness was really perverted. It was as if a mage had thrown a ball of flame on his tongue and poured a mouthful of hot oil into his mouth. The flames were raging in his mouth and spreading down his throat. Tony felt that he had to spit out this mouthful of fish. Otherwise, he might be burned to death on the spot. As for his pride, fuck his pride. Uncle, does it taste good? Vanessa suddenly asked. This. Tony opened his mouth, and the fish slid down his throat. His neck was visibly turning red as it slid down into his stomach. Tony was stunned for a moment before grabbing Abraham's beer and taking 2 big gulps. He then chewed the 2 ice cubes at the bottom of the glass and swallowed them. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. His clothes were completely drenched in the blink of an eye, and he felt as if he was in a daze. 2 more glasses of cold beer, please. Abraham looked at Tony sympathetically, and gestured to Mia with his hand. No. How can there be such a terrifying spiciness in this world? Also, how can this little girl eat it so sweetly and deliciously? This isn't something that a normal demon can accept. Tony looked at the astonished Vanessa, and felt as if his soul had been deceived. Blue, thin, mushroom. Chapter 1420. Isn't it super delicious? Vanessa looked at Tony with a smile. It's all right. Tony felt as if his tongue had been tied up, and he couldn't even speak properly. Vanessa's eyes lit up, and she continued, then you have to eat more. My uncle and Laura can't eat much, and I usually eat most of the fish by myself. It's not very fun. That's the spirit. Good luck. Vanessa picked up her chopsticks, and continued to indulge in the grilled fish. Same here. Abraham raised his glass to Tony, and there was a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Tony raised his glass, and didn't want to say anything. Instead, he gulped down a large mouthful of cold beer. Tony finished his dinner under the dual sanctions of pain and pleasure. However, to be honest, after getting over the initial agony of the insanely spicy taste, he gradually began to appreciate the deliciousness of the grilled fish. The crispy fish skin, the smooth and tender fish meat, and the side dishes that had been soaked in the gravy were all extremely exquisite and delicious. Tony had to admit that none of the grilled fish he had ever tasted could compare to this. If the insanely spicy level was replaced with the normal level of spiciness, he should be able to appreciate the deliciousness of the grilled fish in a more detailed manner. It looks like it's not unreasonable for this restaurant to be loved by so many customers and be praised by so many peers, Tony mused to himself. Regardless of whether it was the environment, the ambience, or the taste of the food, this was the best restaurant he had ever seen. Bill, please, Abraham said. Anna walked out with a small box in her arms. Abraham smiled, and said, I'll pay for everything on this table. Anna pondered for a moment, and said, 4 braised crayfish, a large grilled fish, 6 glasses of cold beer, and 4 glasses of fruit juice. The total is 8,800 copper coins. Abraham fished out 8 dragon coins, and handed them to Anna, and said, keep the change. Thank you. Anna nodded, and put away the dragon coins before making her way to the next customer. Thank you for your generosity. Tony nodded at Abraham in greeting. As a middle-aged man who had been poisoned by the insanely spicy sauce together, he felt a sense of camaraderie. Although he was curious about the owner of this restaurant, Tony only wanted to return to the hotel to take a hot bath and change into comfortable clothes. Hence, he got up and bid farewell to Vanessa and the others. "Raina, is your mother feeling better?" After the dinner service, Meg took off his apron and hung it on the hanger. He looked at Raina, who was cleaning up the stove, and asked, "Well, after Princess Irina's treatment, my mother's illness has been completely cured, but she is still a little weak. After drinking the bone soup these days, she has been relieved very well." Raina nodded, looking at Meg with eyes full of gratitude. "That's good." She had seen Amy release a fireball before, so she could imagine that scene immediately. Or you can catch Ugly Duckling, and then throw it out with a wave of your hand. That way, it can squash those bad demons with its weight. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a smile, and said, "When you throw it out, you can even shout, 'I'm throwing you, Ugly Duckling.'" Meow tilde Ugly Duckling let out a bitter cry. "Oh, I get it." Anna's eyes lit up, and her gaze landed on Ugly Duckling. She could even throw Ugly Duckling. Could she try it the next time she encountered a scary demon? Ugly Duckling felt the gazes on it, and slowly retreated to hide behind Meg's feet. It stuck half of its head out to look at Amy and Anna with an innocent expression, exuding sadness. Meg was also amused by Amy's analogy. He reached out to touch the two little ones' heads, and said, "All right, go upstairs and wash up. It's time to get ready for bed. Children shouldn't stay up late." Millimeter. Amy and Anna nodded obediently. They held hands and skipped up the stairs. Ugly Duckling hesitated for a moment, but still chose to follow behind the two of them slowly. Then, Amy scooped it up. "Ugly Duckling, you've already grown 2 little wings. Why can't you fly?" "Maybe I've eaten too much. I don't like it." "I'm throwing you, Ugly Duckling." "Haha, I caught it." "I'm throwing you, Ugly Duckling." "I caught it too." "I'll throw it back to you." "I caught it." Smack Aya, it fell on the ground. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.